Hello one and all. Today, as promised, we are going to be getting into our infamous rocket launcher. This guy right here. So let's go to, from the content folder, blueprints, weapons, and we're going to open up our rocket launcher. What we're going to need here is our usual pull trigger, event pull trigger, and release trigger, event release trigger. And we're going to need our boolean is trigger pulled for a setter. And we're going to need two of them. We're going to set it to true if we pull the trigger and false if we release the trigger. Next up, we're going to get fire weapon, which is our function from our base weapon. And we're going to get a branch and connect that up as we did last time. So here's where things change. Fire weapon is a function designed specifically for our line trace weapons, which is all of our other weapons. But we are going to use the line trace here, except it's not to do damage. Later on, we might use it to set a location for our rocket to track or to track an actor. But for now, it's just going to be a little tester. So if we click on class defaults, we're going to put 0 on damage over here. And range is also going to be irrelevant. Accuracy, we want to be 0. We want it to be a straight shot. So the reason we're still using this other than the line trace is because it's also checking for our ammunition. So the way our rocket launcher is going to work is it's going to spawn the rocket, literally spawn a completely different actor to do the damage, which is how we would do it if we weren't doing line trace weapons. We would be spawning bullets. So let's get spawn actor from class and plug that into true. Again, we need to be able to fire successfully for this actor to spawn. If we didn't have this boolean here, we'd just be spawning a rocket even if we were out of ammunition. Now let's go and create our actual rocket. Inside the same folder, let's right click, create blueprint class. It's going to be an actor, and we're going to call this projectile underscore rocket, because we'll have different projectiles. We'll even have a grenade at some point. So let's open this up and drag that tab up there. So the first thing we'll do is add a projectile component. Type in projectile, and it's going to come up with projectile movement. And when we add this, we're going to have a whole bunch of new options to play with here, which is essentially going to propel the rocket forward. We're going to keep default scene root, click on add component. We're going to add a capsule. Then on top of the capsule, we'll add a static mesh. Then on top of the static mesh, we're going to add radial force. So this is the stack. We've got our scene, our capsule component, our static mesh, and our radial force. The scene is going to allow us to rotate these guys over here. Have a look at the scene. All you can adjust is the scale. So the scene is kind of like a foundation. Then the capsule is going to be like inside our character, the trigger that allows us to detect something. Static mesh is easy enough. We're going to get a rocket. We're going to select launcher B ammo. And there's our rocket. Now let's grab the capsule. We're going to rotate the y-axis to about 90 degrees. And the static mesh, we're going to rotate to -90. So the capsule is facing the same way as the rocket. Then we'll drop down that capsule till it's about the same size as the rocket. So I'm going to go with 15 and 5. So let's compile and save that. Over to the event graph. We're going to right click on capsule, add event, on component hit. This is going to be very similar to what we had inside of our line trace. We're going to start with an emitter. So type in spawn emitter at location. We're also going to spawn a sound at location. We'll get a self-reference. And from that self-reference, let's get actor transform. Let's break that transform. Plug in all three of these guys here. Scale is unnecessary, but we just going to plug it in anyway because it's there. If anything, if you were to adjust the scale inside the viewport, you would leave the scale disconnected here. And from the emitter, once again, our lovely weapons pack, if we type in rocket, we can see rocket launcher explosion. Now, another place we could have got the location would be the hit result. So let's drag out of hit, and you'll notice that dark blue kind of insinuating that this is a struct, and it is. So if we click break hit result and hit the drop down, we've got ourselves a location coming from there. And you could just plug this location in here. Let's drag the location over here. We're going to keep this open for now because there's one other thing we need to do, and hit the drop down here. That is going to be, if we type in rocket again and get rocket launcher explosion Q. Now let's go and get effect health. And from effect health, our target is going to be hit actor. Let's punch in 100 on the delta. We could set this to a variable later. We'll drop down that break result and clean this up with some reroutables. And then drag in our radial force and fire impulse. So our radial force is going to essentially simulate the physics of an explosion. And then finally, we're going to destroy actor. After doing all of that. So that's the basic rocket script, and we're going to have to come back here in a moment because we need to double check all of our collision, which is the reason we're not doing this way back with the other weapon tutorials. This is actually a bit of a headache to get right the first time. So that's why I considered it something that was a little more advanced. So let's compile and save that. Now back over to our rocket launcher, we can hit that drop down and type in rocket and select projectile rocket. Now the exact location we want this rocket to spawn from is actually our skeletal mesh. Then we're going to get socket location. The particular socket we want is called muzzle flash. I'll quickly show you that muzzle flash over here. If we go down to imports, open up military weapon dark, open up weapons, come over to the rocket launcher B skeleton. You'll see the muzzle flash, essentially a bone sitting right here. So that's where our rocket's going to fire from. That's where I'm getting that muzzle flash reference from. But you'll notice that I've got a location here, and this is the spawn transform. We're going to right click on the spawn transform and hit split struct pin. This time we're going to ignore scale. The other thing we want is our get player controller and get control rotation. So control rotation is actually what's going on when we turn to the left and right and look up and down. That's what's moving. It's the control rotation, not necessarily the pawn rotation. So we're going to use the control rotation to determine which way the rocket should be firing, and the socket location to determine exactly where the rocket spawns. Let's also go over to our class defaults and select rocket launcher fire. We'll also punch in reload here. So we've got our effects that we did in the last episode happening. Compile and save that. Let's go back over to projectile rocket and click on projectile movement. We haven't actually given the projectile any speed. So let's start with 1,000. And a lot of this is going to be to your preference. Let's hit 0 on gravity scale. Compile, save. Over to the test map. And there's our rocket, firing away. This time, let's go and test to see what happens when it actually hits something. And you'll notice that it's going right through, because this is the next problem we're about to have. Dealing with our collision. If we have a look at what our collision is set up to do, so we're going to set capsule to block all, making sure that simulate generate hit is selected and generate overlap events is selected. Now, when it comes to our static mesh, we need to make sure that we have no collision. And then finally, let's go and drag in a normal static mesh, remembering that we wouldn't be using these brushes inside of our world. We would actually be using static and skeletal meshes for the most part. If you build an entire level with these, it's going to be very laggy. So they don't quite have all the bits and pieces. They're more like Play-Doh that you're meant to set and then build with later. And you can see here it actually has an option to convert to another actor. We can convert that to just about anything, and the most common one is a static mesh. If you've got basic open on the left, let's drag in a cube. Let's turn on simulate physics so that cube falls to the ground, and making sure that generate overlap events on the actual cube is selected with all of those things checked. And you can see here if I've changed something, this collision preset has changed because I've turned on physics up here. All I've done for this cube is turn on physics, simulate generate hit events, and generate overlap events. So now when I hit play and walk up to the rocket launcher, we've got ourselves an explosion, and that radial force is also firing as well, because you can see the cube fly off the map. So we'll leave it here for this episode, and in the next episode, we'll continue working on these weapons to make them even better.